Andrew Starkey of Prometheus Wines, thank you so much for joining me on this wonderful evening. I hear that you've got a wonderful roast that you're looking forward to. So you've been very generous giving me this section of your time. Promise I'm going to make the best use of it. How are you this evening?
Yeah, mate. Look, I'm really good. Sort of wine in hand, just
Yep.
as you are.
Be-
So it's been a pretty nice. I've got actually an Eden Valley Shiraz, believe it or not. So I pulled something out of the cellar, and was having a go at that, and thought, oh, I'll sort of match the food to the wine, and it's just all kind of come out well. But Eden Valley is sort of one of the wines that got me into wine, I suppose. So many years ago, I worked at McWilliams Wines, which no longer is standing on its own 2 feet. But at the time, they had a really cool little business on the side called Echelon Wines, and one of the wines that was part of that was a brand called Zeppelin. And Zeppelin Wines was an Eden Valley brand that had some top tier Eden Valley Shirazes that came out, and one of them was called the Amelie, which was a single vineyard from the High Eden location, I think it was from memory. And it was just, I drank it and it was like Skittles in my mouth. There was so much fruit flavor.
Yep.
And I was just like, I remember even where I was sitting. I was in a Chinese restaurant in Greenacre, because that's where they were located at the time. I'm drinking this wine with a couple of colleagues. I'm like, this is outstanding stuff. And they're like, yeah, it's pretty good gear, eh? I'm like, yeah, it's good. It's a phenomenal. So I've always remembered that. Bought a couple of cases of that and steadily drank my way through it over the next few years. But yeah, so every time I go back to Eden Valley Shiraz, I've got fond memories of it.
Okay. And yet you're the marketing and distributions director at Prometheus, but you're the co-founder. So you're the perfect person to be talking to if I'm wanting to extract the Prometheus story. And I thought what might be
Yeah,
an interesting place to start is the name. Know a little bit about
yeah.
my ancient Greek mythology, and so Prometheus. I go doing, why Prometheus? Um
Um,
does that have with the winery?
Good question. My sort of thought process with the name. So myself, Daniel, the winemaker, and another colleague who went on the journey with me. So I sort of handle more the marketing and the sales. Daniel handles the winemaking, distribution, and logistics and stuff. And then my other colleague is a silent partner. He basically mentors me and helps me with making sure I don't make too many errors and things of that nature. But the name Prometheus sort of came out of the idea of I have spent a lot of time in corporate from a drinks perspective. So I spent about, as I said, 2 years at McWilliams, spent 6 years at Endeavour Drinks, which is the Dan Murphy's BWS machine, and spent about a year at Pernod Ricard. And during my time, I sort of built up, I suppose, this repertoire of information and insight to wine brands. And I sort of came to the conclusion that there's two types of wine brands. There's that more evocative, sort of very experiential, very much about the ideas that sit behind the brand, which is what we aim Prometheus to be. Or there's the wine brands that are basically built, I suppose, in an old school way, where you've got a chateau, or you've got a vineyard, you've got a winery, you've got a cellar door manager, you've got, a dog that runs through the vineyards, you've got, all of those cool things that kind of go to making a winery as magical a place as you can imagine. And because of the way that we built our brand, we weren't going to be one of those. We weren't going to be someone that had bricks and mortar. We weren't going to be someone that had a cellar door. We built our wine brand basically out of relationships with people. So we have a number of people who we sort of deal with and chat with that are based in the Riverland, and they're all families. So if you check out our Instagram, there's a couple of them that we've sort of talked to. I don't get the name pronunciations right, but basically Nick is one who does our Grenache and a couple of things. And we've got the Luders family who do our Monty, and there's a couple of others that sort of float around. And these relationships that we've built and grown are really lovely, and they're very much about what can we actually do to help these people build the profile of the wine that they grow. And one of the awesome things that the Riverland does is it grows fantastic Mediterranean varietals in a terroir which is really suited to growing them. So these people have sort of been for years growing great, beautiful Mediterranean varietals and never had their name on a label, never had their wine um, uh, sort of exposed to the people in a way that I think they should have. Personally, what they've done is they've sort of grown bulk wine, and they've sort of just bundled it all up and sold it to big businesses. And so when we sort of started this journey, our decision was we wanted to build a wine brand that kind of gave back to people a little bit more than it took. And that was our whole aim. And the idea was that Prometheus was sort of seen as a patron during classical Greek, or I think it was that period where he was obviously gifting people with things that, they didn't have. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to gift the growers the opportunity to have their wines showcased in an awesome way that they've never had. But B, we wanted to give people with something that was a little bit different. We find that many of the stories that make wine as amazing and cool and wonderful thing that it is never really get told in the way that it should. And so this way we could, give a bottle of wine to a consumer that they've never had before. I'm pretty sure not many people have drunk a Tinta Barocca from the Riverland at all, or Alianico for that matter. They'll drink it, they'll love it, and it will kind of be like this little gift that they've got from the growers to them. And that was kind of the aim behind the name.
Okay, that's really, really cool. At this point, can we talk about the Riverland? So I've had a lot of South Australian winemakers on the show. I've done Barossa, McLaren Vale, Clare, etc. Riverland, you're my lucky first. So what is going on in the Riverland as a geographical area? And you mentioned, the more Mediterranean varietals. So you guys do a Barbara and things like that. The Alianico. Yeah, but what's going on that makes it those sorts of varietals suitable there?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. I think the best way to kind of describe it is the Riverland is a place which historically was, and I'll go into a bit of the history of it. Historically, it was a place where after the Second World War, the South Australian government and to some extent the Victorian, because obviously the Murray River traverses through those two states, but the South Australian government, as a means of kind of supporting the soldiers as they came back, decided to grant a lot of these people large sort of parcels of land for very, very cheap prices to encourage them to go out there, cultivate the land, grow crops, and sort of turn the area into a bit of a breadbasket for Australia. And you'll sort of notice all the way along, if you go to Google Maps and you have a look at the sort of satellite imagery, you'll see that the river has this wonderful kind of green patch to it that goes and snakes around before it sort of then, as you go a bit further out, it turns into sort of a much more arid climate. And the idea behind the South Australian government there was let's actually grow as much as we can to obviously support the economy. Over time, as the Australian wine industry developed and changed, one of the things that happened was people moved from fortified wines into table wine. But obviously the amount or the volume that you can grow in a lot of what we call the dry grown regions, South Barossa, Clare Valley, McLaren, simply isn't enough to satisfy the demand that was there at the time that the industry was growing. So a lot of the a lot of the farmers in the Riverland sort of saw this growth and realized that they've got a fantastic irrigation system, which means that they can produce really big, volumes of wine. And many of the farmers that were there had hobby sort of vineyards as well. And so what they decided to do is they sort of changed over some of their crops to vines, and away they went. Now, at the time, they produced and planted a lot of Cabernet, Chardonnay, Sauvignon, Shiraz, because they were the varietals that were very much in focus at the time. But what a lot of the sort of original vine growers were doing was planting, because they were European by descent. They were planting varietals that they had drunk when they were back in Europe into the ground at the same time as well. So many of the vines that we're sort of sourcing fruit from were laid in the 80s, the 90s, and the sort of early 2000s because they were from European immigrants who'd come out and decided they wanted to grow something that they were familiar with. So what has actually happened is as the Riverland has grown from a production perspective, Australia has started to export over to China. And in the process of doing that, quite a large volume of the Riverland wine was actually heading overseas. What that did is it kind of created a bit of a supply drain on Australia for things like Shiraz and Cabernet. And these emerging varietals were starting to come to the fore because people, A, were interested in something a little bit new and different because, all the Shiraz and stuff was going overseas. But B, the wonderful fact is that when you go to Europe and you drink all these varietals and you come back to Australia, like, I can't find any of them anywhere. And so people were actually a little bit more experimental and wanting to come back and see if they can drink these wines. So some of the Riverland wine growers have actually clocked onto this fact. And, Ashley Ratcliffe and Alex Russell are probably two that I'd say really have been paving the way. Ashley's been doing this for quite a while now. Started to kind of wave the flag and say, check this stuff out that we're doing. We're doing some really cool things. And people sort of paid attention and slowly these emerging varietals were coming to the fore. And, it's been helped obviously by the emergence of Grenache. McLaren Vale and Barossa were trying to do something a bit different, grew some Grenache, and then, now per ton, it's more expensive to buy Grenache out of the Barossa and McLaren than it is to buy Shiraz. So that sort of goes to show you the sort of real incline in Australian sort of wine pedigree when it comes to an emerging varietal perspective. So so that's sort of how it all started to happen, and many of the things that were driving forces behind where we got to now. And I suppose we sort of started to double in this back in 2020 when we sort of saw that the push to export wine was just growing and growing. And the conversations we were having with people is, they don't want, a couple of people came and said, they don't want the Alianica or they don't want the Monty. They just want the straight Shiraz. What do we do with it? And we sort of said, well, we can find a home for it. We can do something cool. And thus the story was born.
Okay. And from the get-go, when you guys started out, were you always dealing in those alternative European varietals? Because you got a bit of a diverse portfolio. It's really, really interesting. So what went into piecing that together? So, it's looking like the way it is now.
Yeah, that really was a deliberate sort of approach. So we thought to ourselves, rather than try and do Shiraz and Cabernet, we would do something very specific for Prometheus. That's not to say that down the track we might not, do something a little bit different, release a brand that has a Shiraz. But our aim with Prometheus was we want it to be different. We want it to be emerging varietals because we know that that's what people would like to buy. So we very deliberately went and set course that way. So so we really did kind of just sort of throw caution to the wind and did something a bit different there.
Yeah. Okay. We'll continue on the Prometheus story, I guess, a little bit later. I want to focus on you. So you bring a very interesting perspective to this conversation, given the corporate background, and it's not every day I get to speak with somebody who's got a different sort of background coming into what they're doing currently. So tell me about that. Where are you from? Where did it all start? And how did you get into the liquor/wine scene?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I originally started my career as a supply and demand planner. So I had a bent towards marketing, but sort of got an internship at Johnson & Johnson way back in the day. So my first job was really peddling, consumer goods of that nature, which was, fine. There's no problem with it. Had a couple of stints at a few different places. Had a go at Unilever as well. That was fun. But then at the time, I decided to move overseas, and I went to do some work with the community in Tonga for 12 months, and sort of moved over there. And after about 9 months, 10 months in, I could see the bank balance sort of getting a little bit low, and thought might be time to come home soon. So I reached out to a recruiter that I knew and said, look, I'm probably going to be back in Sydney sometime in around late July, early August. Can you have a hunt around? And he's like, yeah, sure, no problem. And I think it was 2 days before I got on the plane to come home, he messaged me out of the blue in an email. I said, "Oh, what are you doing on the 1st of August?" And I said, "Nothing. What do you want me to do? I'll have landed the day before." He's like, "I'll come for an interview at McWilliams." I'm like, "Yeah, all right. No problem. Sounds like a good idea." He's gone, "You don't have any ethical issues with wine?" I said, "Only if you're not pouring me a glass." And that sort of started it. And I remember coming out of beautiful, 25, 30 degree warmth, into Sydney, driving to Chullora in a car and coming out, and I had 4 layers on and I was freezing in this office. And they're like, "Can we get you anything?" And I'm like, "Oh, can I get a glass of hot water so I can put my hands on them?" Because I hadn't been smart enough to bring any gloves. And anyway, so I interviewed there as a demand supply planner, and I had a really kind of gifted sort of run through, because they didn't have anyone else that was a suitable applicant. So I sort of, what do they call it? Defaulted in, or what's the guy that was the Stephen Bradbury? That's it. Bradbury it in and went, "Oh, this is fun." Yeah. So I went, "This is great." So they were really happy with me though. So I started there, and I had no idea about wine previously. Had drunk a lot of beer, but not much wine at all.
Yep.
And they put me through the education process, which was bronze, gold, bronze, silver, and gold, and sort of spent 2 years there, sort of fixing the supply chain and helping them out with lots of different things. And I had a colleague there called Ben, who was quite a talented manager, and he got poached by Woolworths or Endeavour. And as he was sort of on the way out, he said, "Can I give you a call maybe in a few months?" And I said, "Sure, Ben, give us a call in a few months." And he and I were really good mates. And he kind of gave me a call and said, "I need a demand planner. Can you come over and give me a hand?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, sure. Sounds like a fun idea." So I walked into what was, at the time, it was basically Woolies Liquor was called Woolies Liquor, but it was in the process of changing its name to Endeavour. And that the division that we sat in was called the Wine Quarter. The Wine Quarter basically was Wine Market, Langton's, Cellar Masters, New Zealand Wine Society, and what was called Next Day Delivery, which was the what eventually became the Endeavour Delivery. And I came in, and basically Ben said, "The place is a mess. I need you to fix all of the demand and supply problems. Can you do it in about 6 months?" I said, "I think you're laughing, but all right, let's give it a go." So we set to work on doing that.
Yeah.
And I control.
Can I just jump in there super quickly? Sorry, because the great things about these chats, so educational in so many different formats. A demand and supply planner. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a really stupid question. Can you just unpack that? Like,
yeah, sure.
What are you doing?
No, that's all right. Basically, demand and supply planner is the best way I explain it is when you go into Woolies or Coles and you take your object to pay for it at the counter, you scan that object and it goes beep and you pay for it and blah. All of that data is collected into a giant system that's called IRI, which catalogs it based off the barcodes and shows all of Woolworths and then the suppliers that pay for the data how much stock is actually being sold. What you can then do is get what's called a baseline of sales, and then you can also check when it's on promotion, because you get spikes in your purchasing when you get promotions. But yeah, basically we collate all that data, and then they hand it to the demand planner, who sits there and analyzes the historical patterns of sales, projects forward a forecast of what that would look like, which then feeds into the financial forecast. So they basically go, "Well, we know that we're going to sell this much roughly." So they can then, make their P&Ls and their revenue forecasts and give investment information to all the people that they need. Then what we do is we catalog all that information, drill it back down into the bill of materials, and funnel it into the supply chain. So I then take that information to production planners and to dry goods producers and what have you, and say, "I need this much. I need you to go and do that." So we would feed it into a system, and then produce all the stock that would then sit on shelf. So it created it was kind of one of the key roles in a supply chain to ensure that you got right, because if you rubbish in, rubbish out was the statement that we sort of lived and died by. If your numbers were rubbish, you got rubbish out. If you didn't forecast properly, you were then out of stock on shelf. If you're out of stock on shelf, Woolies were very unhappy with you, or Coles were very unhappy with you, and you'd have to pay for lost sales and things like that. So it became a bit of a problem at that end. Alternatively, if you put too many numbers in and you had too high a forecast, you produced too much stock, and your warehouse would be on the phone yelling at you, going, "I have nowhere to put this stuff." It was a very thankless role in one sense, because you were always wrong, because you never got it 100% right. But I enjoyed the diversity of dealing with different people, and it's a great way to get to know a business, is to sit in demand planning or supply planning role, because you really do get a kind of a bird's eye view of everything. So, yeah, I then sort of took all that skill set into the wine quarter and fixed that. But the great thing about it is, by that point, I had an interest in wine. So I'd kind of gone from, this is kind of fun, wine's fun to drink, to in the wine quarter, Ben had basically said, I don't need you to just do demand and supply planning. I need you to do merchandising as well. And then I need you to do inventory and whole kit caboodle, because Salamasters at the time was a bit of a small business, and smaller business. And you kind of needed to do multiple roles. So I got thrown a whole heap of things I'd never known. And so that was where I started to learn, okay, well, different labels got different responses to emails for customers, for instance. So you get different pull through of the stock, different price points, worked at different levels. I learned about all the back end winery mechanics. So I learned how much it costs to actually produce a bottle of wine, how much cost it would be to get the dry goods, what the dollar per litre roughly should be for a wine of this grade versus that grade. So I got this huge amount of kind of understanding by sitting in this role. And it was a wonderful experience for me. I had a great time there. It's probably one of my favorite work experiences that I've ever had, was this kind of really niche little business that had, a huge amount of customers that we were talking to, 150,000 customers at one point. We had a huge amount of wine that we would sort of had to divvy up and work out what label it will go under. So I was kind of responsible for overseeing a lot of that with the brand manager. And then as kind of time went on, I added more and more things. So I added the purchasing. So I then buy wine, because we had a small amount of budget to purchase wine from external suppliers to bring in, because customers liked certain brands. And so I started that, which is how I built up the relationships with the partners that I now work with. Funnily enough, I previously used to buy wine off them. Now I'm making wine with them and selling it with them. And then, it's kind of got that idea. And then after that, I spent I spent 5 years in the wine quarter / cellar masters, and then I spent a year at Pinnacle, which was the internal supplier to Woolworths, or the Dan Murphy's and BWS teams. And I worked on the commercial wine and Chapel Hill brands at the time. So things like Infamous Dodger and Cat Amongst the Pigeons, I was doing a lot of the brand marketing for at the time, which was a lot of fun and a different sort of skill set to the one I was previously using. It was much more marketing focused. So yeah. And then from there, I kind of got pinched by what do you call it, Pernod Ricard, because they wanted someone who sort of had a really good view and understanding of wineries and brands and things like that. And they said, come over and do innovation planning for us. And so I went over and did that for 12 months and sat in Barangaroo and used to watch the cars go past on the Harbour Bridge for lunch. It was $1 million view with my little reheats that I'd eat. And so basically I focused on the kind of production, or not production, but project management of all the innovation that came through their pipeline. And that was good. That was good exposure. Big businesses do things very differently. But I kind of just reached the point where I was like, I think I'd really like to do something on my own. I think I'd really like to do something where I had autonomy and control over how it would work. And was sort of chatting to a few people that I used to deal with when I was buying wine. And a couple of them said, why don't you come on board with us and we'll do something cool? I said, sounds like a good idea. So took us a few months to kind of get everything up and running, and then off and away we went. So yeah.
Okay. And that's where Prometheus comes in.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. That is absolutely fascinating. And you just, I guess, focusing on that corporate background there. Um, what can you carry across? Like, I'm just, you've already said they were massively different, and they sound massively different. You know, Pernod Ricard, Woolies, Coles, etc. And then um, something like Prometheus, much smaller. Were you able to directly apply everything that you'd learned in the previous life, or was it kind of scrapping it clean slate, completely different skill set, given it's much smaller?
That's a good question. I think one thing about corporate businesses, and I don't think a lot of people get the chance to experience this, is when you're working in a role, it's your role. Like it's a role. You got one mindset. You got one sort of kind of have blinkers in a way because you're only focusing on one set of tasks that fall into a framework that you have control over. And that's great because you become quite specialized. I've had the fortune of kind of going through supply chain to marketing to category management to warehousing and logistics and all of that type of stuff. Marketing and branding. So my journey was very unique in the sense that I got a lot of opportunities I probably wouldn't have got just by virtue of who I knew and the successes that I'd had doing the role in Cellar Masters. But what I didn't realize is you get a great concept of what the industry is like from an upper kind of privileged view, if I can put it that way, where you don't have to worry about how much it costs to run a bottling. You don't have to worry about your cash flow. You don't have to worry about your relationships with growers. You don't have to worry about whether Woolies or Coles pay on time or anything, because it's all you're oblivious to it in one sense. It's never something that you consider. When I moved into Prometheus, all of that became a factor. So cash flow and trading terms become very important. And in fact, if you've got someone that you're selling wine to and you don't get paid for 90 days, you don't get paid for 90 days.
Yeah.
If you have
hard.
yeah, all of that type of stuff started to come to the fore, and it's just like, wow, okay, so this is really difficult. Decisions that you make have consequences now. So one of the things that we did is we put Prometheus into a different bottle shape, and the idea behind that was we wanted to stand out on shelf and attract the eye. So we have quite different packaging in that sense, where the little angel and all of those things. It's designed to attract the eye so that the consumer will pick up the bottle and at the very least read it. And because we know that once people pick up a bottle and they're reading it, there's a greater chance for the consumer to try it because they're seeing the story at some level, becomes tangible, and they're interested enough to go, well, I'll give it a go and see how this goes with my parcel tonight. That decision actually was one thing which is great, but another thing that was challenging, because now we had the problem where we were trying to sell the wine to different people and people were going, it doesn't fit on my shelf. Like, oh, it doesn't fit in your shelf. No. And some people are like, it doesn't fit in our boxes. We can't send it out to customers, so we can't buy it. And you're like, oh, okay. So we had all this data and all this information that people were sort of sending into people saying, from a big business perspective, yeah, do different bottle shapes, do different varietals, do different this, and this. And the challenge that we found with that is, whilst what that data was suggesting was in part true, it created other problems that we didn't necessarily realize at the time. And now we're like, oh, well, we need to, pivot and do things differently for the next vintage to make sure that we don't have the same challenges. But I would say that the biggest issue is that, one, you don't realize all the nuances. Two, you do everything. You don't have holidays. You don't have time off, because when you're not there, the wine doesn't get sold. When you're not there, you can't drum up the sale. So, holidays become a bit more of a luxury than you realize. And you then start to deal with all the different finer points, like, how does something look on a website? Does it really matter? And all of a sudden those questions mean so much more, because you're the one that's answerable for them. So where, in a big corporate business, you've got kind of these divisions that are all focused on answering those things. And that can sometimes create some disjointedness. When you're a small business trying to sell as a brand, it's very difficult to pull everything together because there is literally so much to do. And so that was kind of a shock to my system from coming out of the corporate world. It's like, wow, this is full on. I mean, I love it. It's great. It's stressful, but it is very enjoyable. But it's also you really are quite pushed. You're pushed to do everything because you have to. If someone isn't going to, if there's a job to do and you don't do it, it's not getting done.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah. So that's kind of that's the thing that I learned the most about coming out of corporate is when you're in your own wine brand and building it, you really are building it, right? So another great example is the socials. People interact on the socials, which is wonderful. We love when people make a comment or say something, but you don't realize that what you say is actually your decision, and how you are talking on those posts is now your tone of voice as a brand. You're like, oh my gosh, I never even thought about that. So you've got to kind of go into a different mindset again when you're in the socials, dude. So there's stuff like that. You just go, oh wow, okay, I really didn't bargain on that.
Yeah. Okay. So since Prometheus's plural, Prometheus's inception all the way through to today, tough times, when did it all start coming together and you went, I've really got something here that's viable and this thing's gonna run?
Yeah, look, I think I suppose the tough times were the second COVID lockdown in Sydney was really difficult. Prevented us from getting out to seeing people, and there's a huge market in Sydney. It also prevented us from getting anywhere else, for that matter. So we couldn't visit, key customers and go, hey, try the wine, and that made it really difficult. I think there's a lot of wineries in the market at the moment that are really challenged by the issues that kind of COVID brought about. So for us, it was we kicked off at probably the worst possible time ever. So it's been a little bit of a, slog uphill through mud. But I think where we started to see that we had something was when we started to see customer feedback. People like, actually, this is really good. This is great wine. We really like the wine. A lot of people were very cautious about trying it up front, I think, because I don't know how to pronounce Aglianico, let alone I don't know what it tastes like. I've never heard of Tinta Barocca before. Why am I doing this? So I think fairly too, people are a bit curious. I don't know what any of this tastes like. I don't know what any of this means. Why would I pick this over pepper jack or something? But what we did find is that when people actually took a chance and had a go, feedback we received was great. We were really encouraged by it. People loved the flavors. They loved the packaging after they sort of got used to it. They really enjoyed what we tried to stand for. And I think that made a big difference. That made a big difference to us because we could then take that back to the growers and say, there's something here. It's going to be a tough slog, but there's something here, and if we keep persisting with this, we'll get somewhere.
Okay, and that sort of leads into my next question. In terms of the art of the sell in the wine industry, so I've recently spoken with some wineries that are really pushing on the dynamic frontier, and they say a big part of that, apart from the ethical consideration that they've taken in terms of making the decision. Really important these days in what's becoming, I don't want to say a saturated industry, but just that the number of wineries and wine sellers in the wine industry just exponentially increasing. So in terms of being able to make that connection with the consumer and make that sell, that sounds like that's your bread and butter. trying to figure out what goes into that. So to your mind, what are you looking at? What are you analyzing? And what is the best way to make that connection with a consumer?
So one of the things that we tried to do is on the back of our Prometheus, like we put little icons that sort of talked about what was in the bottle. So gluten-free, vegan-friendly, lighter in oak, lower in alcohol, whatever. The different wines had different attributes. We've sort of discovered that people really, really want to know what's in the glass without necessarily having to taste it. And that's a big thing. So that was where the expressions, so we got the two ranges, Prometheus and Expressions, which is our sort of more entry level. That was what that was designed to be, is something that you could understand what it was very easily without necessarily having to taste it. So that was kind of the driving force there. I would say, and this is probably lifting a little bit, that a lot of the very different USPs that people are picking out on are really just that. They're just ways to try and stand out from the crowd. I love the idea of biodynamic, and I love the idea of organic, and I think they're excellent things for the industry to be engaging with. And I think what will happen is you will see more wine, like right wine grown in right location. And what we mean by that is there's a lot of wine that's grown at the moment that isn't in the right location. And the only way it can be grown there is through the use of pesticides and what have you. But as much as that is amazing and is going to be great, because you will see a shift and a change in the varietals grown in different regions and so forth, you also wouldn't have a lot of the incredible wines that are produced today without some of the intervention that happens. Yarra Valley, for instance, is one which is very difficult to grow wine in that is organic because the conditions sometimes just aren't favourable. Hunter Valley is another one. So very few of the Hunter Valley wineries up in the region are able to be, biodynamic or organic because the threat of disease is always prominent. And you'd sort of think, well, maybe they shouldn't be growing wine up there. Maybe the Hunter isn't a place where wine should be grown. The problem with that is that you've got some of the oldest vineyards in Australia that have ever been. It's one of the birthplaces of Shiraz, really. When you talk about the Wyndham, the Black Cluster, 1828 Shiraz vines. That Wyndham planted up there. Responsible for creating what you'd call the still industry in Australia. Then you got Mount Pleasant with Lovedale, and what Morris did up there, Morris O'Shea, and you've got Tyrrell's, you've got the Vat Ones, you've got all the incredible wineries that are there doing wonderful things. Sometimes they need the intervention to grow the fantastic wine that they do because the conditions are actually really challenging. So what I start to question is I think where the industry is kind of needs to be a little bit more aware of itself is that you don't have Lovedale without sometimes some intervention. And I can tell you, as someone who's drunk a lot of Lovedale, I don't want to live in a world where that wine doesn't exist. That's not good. I don't want to live in a world where Vat 1 and Vat 9 aren't part of my vernacular because we can't use the intervention methods that are necessary there. I think what we as consumers need to be educated a little bit more on is how much is too much and why we're using those things, and help people to understand more about the process itself, because that's what will change the industry is the consumers themselves. And to add to that, I think the consumers that are looking to support the wineries that are small and homegrown, shall we say, taking themselves on that journey and trying to understand more about the methods that those wineries are using and why they're using them, and supporting them in their journey. That's gonna change the industry more than anything, like a biodynamic winery movement or things of that nature. Because what needs to happen, I think, more and more is consumers need to be conscious of the decisions that they're making with where they put their money. Small wineries can do things like grow an Aglianico, can do things like do a Montepulciano that's single vineyard, because they're the ones taking the punt. you get into big corporates and not as willing to do that type of stuff. They're waiting to see how it goes. They're waiting and they'll let other people do those things, because for them to produce those wines at small scale costs them a lot, and they just don't want to. They don't see the merit in doing that all the time. Which I also get. You know, they've got shareholders and things to answer to, and large wineries to keep going too. So there's two ends of this, which I think need to always be understood, is that big wineries are employing a lot of people and contributing to these vineyards going on, versus small wineries who are trying to do niche and different things and using these USPs USPs, unique selling points, like biodynamic and organic, as a means of differentiating themselves from the rest of the pack. So I think for me personally, what I'm most interested in at the moment is I'm interested in single vineyard, and I'm interested in stories. I want to know the people that are doing things at the moment. I want to know I want to see the winemakers out there in the vineyards doing stuff. So a great example is Georgia Dale. I love the wines that she produces, and she's just recently produced a new range for herself. But she has a couple of Instagram posts just recently of her out cutting some of the dead arms off some of her vines. And I just find that fascinating. And I sat and watched, and just watching the way that she was doing it. And to me, that's interesting, because I know that every single one of the wines that I drink from her vineyards has at some point been touched or handled by her, which is then a story. And it connects people back with people. And that's the beautiful thing about wine. So that's where I'm interested in the most, is telling genuine stories about genuine things that are happening. Because I think the most compelling thing that a consumer can engage with is a story about a person that's growing wine and doing things, much like what we're kind of doing today.
Yeah. Loved what you just said, because that's exactly what got me into wine, really, apart from sort of growing up with it a little bit. It was the romance of the stories and the diversity of where that can be, from, Europe to Australia, North America, etc. But just coming back to what you just said, I want to ask you two questions, and I've got a bad habit of like dumping a 5 to 10 questions on somebody, and then we like forget 5 of them. So I'm going to ask you two separately. First one being, I guess, to round up that comment or that question in terms of what goes into distinguishing yourself from a competitor. Based on what you're saying, is the focus, is the answer to your mind story? Or is there actually a need to almost see yourself? Do you even need to see yourself as a competitor? And is it like the public, the consumers, have this myriad of different options of different stories that they can choose from, because the stories are all compelling? Or is there that need to really try and be the better story?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So it's funny. So I don't generally do lots of media, I suppose, for myself, because as far as I'm concerned, the story of Prometheus is the growers and Daniel, and they're the people that really, to me, make up that brand. The work I do behind the scenes is just work. So to me, I think actually, yeah, the story needs to just be genuine. You're always going to compete, right? Because that's just, you're going to watch what other people do and try to craft out your own little niche in the area to make sure that you've got a spot. But I have noticed more and more that the more often you worry less about what people are doing in terms of their story, and the more you focus on what you're doing, the more people are attracted to that. And I think that's it's a bit of a cliche statement, but it's about being true to yourself. We know exactly what we are. We're a wine brand that has, 4 really wonderful growers who grow our wine for us, and we bring that wine to life and tell a story of that. And we have a wonderful winemaker who is highly talented, understands how to get the best out of those wines, or the grapes that come from it anyway, and produces stunning wine as a consequence to that. We're not a wine brand that necessarily you need to sell it for 4 years to get the best out of. We're a wine brand where you open the bottle now, you can drink it, and it will be superb. And we did it like that because we wanted people to experience great wine on a Tuesday and Wednesday night and not have to worry about, will it get better? Some of our wines will, but we produced one with the specific intent to go, you can drink this whenever you want, as long as you just want a good wine. You know what I mean? That's kind of the idea behind it. And that's the story we're trying to sell. We wanted to have good wine and good vibes. And we tell that story, or we translate that story by showing we've taken great parcels of wine from really genuine people, and we've got a great winemaker who understands how to produce fruit forward, flavoursome wine that goes with food, and that's what we're focusing on. So we've competed by trying to do that as best as we can, but we haven't tried to copy or tell someone else's story. We've just told our own.
Okay. Interaction between massive, deep pocket corporations and smaller enterprises, given that you've really played a major role in both. Do you see the two as being able to, work hand in hand and exist in parallel lanes? Or do you think that, some of the reactions of smaller enterprises are dictated by what the larger enterprises are able to do, given deeper pockets?
You can't exist in the industry without being touched on by the large corporates, I think, is probably what I would say. I think what you need to work out is, how do you want to coexist? So it's all a symbiosis, and it's a true ecosystem. And what big corporates do in one area, maybe without necessarily thinking, will impact down the chain. So a great example is if a big corporate chooses to decrease its bottling run and not take on a certain amount of fruit, that has a direct influence to a grower's back pocket. They do get that, I think, personally. I think there's still that human interaction where they understand that there's a consequence to a lot of this. I think that's why I tried to encourage people to go and have a chat, go and visit the wineries themselves, go and talk to the people and actually understand what they go through to produce the wine that they produce. Because I think that whilst they can coexist in an environment which is healthy for both parties, I think it's more challenging for smaller wineries to do that than a large corporate. And people need to be consistently reminded that small guy is worth backing, because the big corporate isn't going away, and that's good too. There's benefit. A lot of the corporate wines, Grange is a corporate wine. Probably Australia's most famous, wine brand. Wins. You look at Saltram. You look at Hardy's. You look at all of these important and monumental wine brands that exist in the industry are all owned by larger corporations. We want those to remain. We want them to succeed, and so we should continue to drink and have them. But to the side of that, there's a whole bunch of very small grape growers that produce their own labels that are doing incredible things that influence those large corporates at some level, because they're always watching what the small guys are doing, because they're wanting to see what the small guy is going to do from an innovation perspective and be second to market with it. So go and support those small people. Go and get there's wineries down the south coast which I don't get to enough, but I go and visit every now and then. I think that the very first Chamberson I ever had was down in the Shoalhaven, which is quite remarkable in some sense. But people should go and engage with those small wineries, whether it's by buying it through a Dan Murphy's or a Liquorland or something like that, or by going to the website and ordering a box, or by going to a wine club and ordering it from a wine club like Wine Selectors, who support a lot of these small brands. Do that, because the stronger that the small producers are, the better the wine industry is, and the better the wine is that you're going to receive, guaranteed, every day of the week. Because it is one of those, rising tide type of things. The stronger everyone is, the better we're going to be. And at the moment, the industry's having a bit of a tough time because of the whole China thing, and we're a lot of people are working on how to get, instead of sort of shipping wine to China, ship wine to the States. But it's a challenging market over there as well at the moment.
Okay. Now, speaking of getting to know wonderful little enterprises, let's meet the team at Prometheus. So you got yourself. Just give us a rundown the line. Who's who in the zoo?
The key ones are probably myself and Daniel. So Daniel Zazzolo, who's the winemaker. He's a guy who's extraordinarily passionate about what he does, and he's very much someone who wants to make sure that he puts the very best effort and very best step forward. So he had a couple of different jobs at different wineries. Probably the best one is Premio Estate that you might know of. So he spent some time there. He's done some vintages in, I believe, France and Italy, which were great experiences for him. But yeah, he does the majority of our logistics and stuff. There's myself, who we've learned a fair bit about, but and we've got a couple of silent partners who like to remain anonymous for the fact that they enjoy drinking the wine, but not necessarily talking about themselves in the process of doing that. So I'll have to keep tight-lipped on that one.
Sure. Okay. What about so quick mention, the portfolio you guys have, and then things moving forward, what you're working on moving into the future, a bit of a snapshot.
Yeah. So our wine brand is split in two. We've got what we call the expressions, which is Summer Squeeze, Berry Blast, and Sherbet Bomb, and they're designed to be real fruit forward, very easy drinking. When you want to crack a bottle of wine on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night, they're the ones that are best for doing that. Or if you're by the poolside, 100% guarantee that Berry Blast and Summer Squeeze are going to be excellent companions to whatever you're doing. Then we've got what we call our Prometheus range, which is I suppose our masthead. We've got a sparkling Vermentino, which is a really delightful sparkling style, really fresh and vibrant. We've got a Pet Nat, which is a little bit different to your standard Pet Nat in that it won't explode on shelf. So some of the challenges with Pet Nat is A, they smell a little bit funky on the nose, and B, they have at times been known to explode on people's wine racks or on the shelving in a store. Ours doesn't do that because of the way that we've processed it, which is great. But it is a phenomenal wine. Apple, pear, bright fruit. It's a bit cloudy as well, so you got that funky kind of complex flavor to it. And then from there, we've got a rosé, Grenache rosé, which is a really bright, fresh Provence style. So dry, but quite light. Strawberries and cream all the way through it. It's gorgeous. Our reds are a Grenache, Barbera. Barbera is kind of like your best sort of pizza wine. If you want to eat pizza, have a Barbera. Then we have an Aglianico, which is an Italian style wine, which Daniel is really proud of, and is probably the one that we've got the best results for. So people have really appreciated what we've done there. We've got a Tinta Barroca, which is it's Portuguese, I believe. Yeah, it's a Portuguese grape varietal. I need to always think about that, but it's gorgeous. It's something that your Cabernet drinkers would love. So it's juicy and red fruit, but it's got quite fine tannins and really defined mouthfeel. Then we've got a Montepulciano, which is delightful. Most people know, I think, what Monty is these days. And then a Mataro, which everyone sort of is a little bit like, oh, okay, not sure about Mataro. So the Mataro is probably my favorite grape style, and it can be done in three ways. So Mataro, Monastrell, and Mourvedre. So Mataro is, I think, I'm probably going to get this wrong, so I'm just going to do it. But Mataro is generally Italian, I believe. Mourvedre is French, and Monastrell is Spanish, because the styles are actually quite different. So our Mataro, when we developed it, it's probably a little bit more of a Mourvedre style, where it's spiced, delicate, pretty, really good nose, that blackberry and black currant on it, and I love it. I think it's great. It's taken a little bit of time to kind of come out of its shell and bottle, but it's now looking really good. And then the final one we've got is the sort of hidden secret, which is a Mistel, which is a Muscat, Le Grain de Baume, I think is how you pronounce it. But essentially it's a sticky. And we aged it in old puncheons, which is essentially a style of oak. And we also added some brandy into it to obviously get it to that fortified state. But it's like drinking lemonade and sherbet. It's awesome. Goes really well with sort of sticky date pudding and your desserts. It's fantastic, and it can also go as an aperitif too. So yeah, so that's kind of the range that we've got. We're quite proud of it, and yeah.
Okay, sounds super fun. What about moving into the future? So anything in the works? You guys just, working tirelessly to move the brand forward? What's going on there?
What we're probably going to do is consolidate what we've got in the next vintage. We might make a little bit of a style change with the bottle shape, just because the glass is quite expensive that we used. So we're going to try and adjust out of that cost to save a little bit of money for ourselves, but also to take on board what people have said, which is doesn't fit on my shelf. We're going to try and put it into a burgundy bottle. So that's probably the main difference that we're going to have. I don't know if you knew, but the Riverland had some hail go through it at the beginning of the year. So that will change a little bit of our makeup for next year. So we won't have quite as many varietals because we simply won't be able to draw them off. But our aim is, I suppose, to kind of do a smaller vintage this year, just keep things tricking over and get people to continue to drink the wine. And then the year after that, we might be looking at doing something a little bit special, a little bit different. So stay tuned for that one.
Amen. Can't wait. All right. Final 3 questions, and then you get to go enjoy your roast. First one. Given that, the diversity of the career you've had going from corporate into a smaller enterprise like Prometheus, what's been the highlight for you? Is there a moment you go, that was the job I've ever had, or this was the best decision I've ever had? Tell me about that.
I think the fact that you're creating something that you are, it's very much part of you. So the brand is very much a part of us. We built something here, and that satisfaction and that joy of being able to do something is unreal. There's nothing quite like actually searching through a website of someone who's ranged it and seeing it pop up in one of their gift packs or something like that. It's just like, wow, we did that. We were part of building that out. And that's really cool. That's deeply satisfying for someone like me.
Okay. Second last question. A wine that you've had. So, and this is, you didn't necessarily, I think you mentioned you didn't grow up drinking wines. You sort of developed that love of wine as you became involved in the corporate style. So since becoming involved in the wine world, what is, to your mind, the best wine you've ever been able to enjoy?
It's challenging to nail it down to one specific one. I'm gonna say that it does change depending on the day you ask. Certainly Lovedale's up there. I've a real passion for aged Semillon. I love it. I think it's delicious. I love Tumbarumba Chardonnay. I think it's a phenomenal expression of the wine itself. Probably the wine that if I'm on death row and I've got one choice, it's probably going to be Henschke Hill of Grace. They're a wonderful, wonderful family. Beautiful people, produce incredible wines, have stayed true to what they're doing. And you drink it and you taste the history. you taste the stories, and then you just get this incredible dollop of flavor through it. Really, really love that. I think that's probably the one that I would, say, wow, that's amazing. And that's just, it's an out of this world wine. And what else?
Pretty good
Probably
list.
the last one is a little bit of a yeah. Probably one that's a bit left of field is I had lunch with friends years ago, and I pulled out a 2001 Eric's blend from Brands Lera. It was in an old cork and great packaging at the time, even though it was all retro and stuff like that. Sat down and pulled the cork out, still fine. Went, all right, had to go at this, and I think the most satisfying and enjoyable part of that was I was drinking this going, this is pretty damn good. Like I'm really in on this. It was Cabernet Malbec Petit Verdot blend. Sitting there, but I'm like, I won't be the typical wine wanker and say anything about it. Just hold my class here. But my mate turned around and he looked at me and he said, "That is the best wine I've ever had in my life." And I just went, boom. I was that guy that brought that wine and he loved it. And I like when that happens, because I like people drinking wine and going, that was awesome. That was everything I wanted in the night. So
Yeah.
I do enjoy that one.
Okay. Final question for you. So young person, could have been, like yourself, making a transition into the wine world from any sort of angle, or they're just a consumer wanting to get to know wine, the product a little bit better. What advice do you have for them so they can get the most out of the experience?
It's a really good question. Short of saying just drink a lot, because I don't think that's RSA. I would actually say, don't ever let your preconceptions sort of shape the way that you check in and look at wine. I think the amount of people that I've had, for instance, I love Riesling, for instance, and I used to do a lot of tastings when I was at Cellar Masters at our barrel tastings, and I'd go up and I'd say, "Try this," and like, "What is it? Riesling?" And they're like, "No, I don't drink Riesling," and that always fascinated me, because they're missing out on a wonderful experience to learn something about wine. And it always made me go, I might not always enjoy certain styles or varietals of wine, but I would never ever turn something away based off that. And I think having that open-mindedness has meant for me that you get a passion to learn and a drive to understand more. And so anyone coming into the industry, I'd say, don't ever let those preconceptions shape the way that you look at wine. Taste it, learn to spit. It's not an offense to spit. You gotta spit a lot of wine to taste a lot of good wine. But be very broad. Go in and look at everything, and when you do eventually settle on things, make sure you're doing it with people. I've had countless experiences of work sort of parties with people around the wine that we love. And when you meet people who love wine as much as you do, and you're sitting around dinner, all of a sudden it's the most engaging, fun, enjoyable thing, and it just peps you all up and you love it. So don't have the preconceptions, and then drink as much of it as you can with the people that you love and enjoy spending time with, because you will find that it's sort of the nectar that helps you to create that fascination with it that you'd never probably have understood before.
Great advice. Couldn't have imagined anybody putting it any better than you just did then. Andrew, it's just been terrific sitting here for the past, I don't know, time flies when you're having fun. Been about an hour. I'm hearing
Absolutely. Yeah.
the Prometheus story, where it's all come from, where it's all going. Can't thank you enough for your time. Been an absolute privilege. You get to go enjoy your roast now.
Thanks, mate. Love it. Cheers.
Awesome. Andrew Starkey, Prometheus Wines, believes in the power of people and the power of the story. Andrew, thank you so much again.